You think an abandoned town is just a few crumbling walls and some ghost stories? No. In Georgia, there's a place where you type the name into your GPS and it takes you straight to a boat ramp because the entire town is under the water. And there's another place where you can be standing right here in the state and still can't step inside because the town is locked behind a military gate. This is it, the 10 most abandoned towns in Georgia, erased from everyday life in ways that are so ordinary they end up feeling even creepier. In the next few minutes, you might end up looking at Georgia with a completely different mindset. Number 10, Scull Shoals, Lost Mill City. You can get there. That is the first weird part. Just north of Interstate 20 near Greensboro, you follow the directions into Oconee National Forest like you are heading toward a normal Saturday plan, not a place that got erased by its own success. It is day use only, sunrise to sunset, which sounds friendly until you realize the forest is basically saying, come visit, but do not get any ideas about staying after dark. When you step out by the Oconee River in Greene County, Scull Shoals does not feel like a ghost town that merely died. It feels like a town that got buried while still breathing. The ruins sit there like teeth in the gums of Georgia history, brick and stone peeking out as if the ground is trying to pretend nothing happened. This started as a frontier settlement in the late 1700s, then leveled up into a classic company town with mills, a warehouse, stores, and a place to sleep when work owned your whole day. And then comes the historical stamp that makes you stop chewing your snack for a second. Georgia's first paper mill was here in 1811. That is the kind of fact that should come with a little drum roll. A fire wiped out the wooden mill buildings in 1845, so they rebuilt in brick and were operating again by 1846, because nothing says optimism like rebuilding a factory next to a river that can get moody. By 1854, this place was running about 2,000 spindles and looms, chewing through about 4,000 bales of cotton valued around $200,000, and at times employing more than 600 people. This was industrial Georgia before Atlanta became the modern symbol people picture in their heads. Here is the twist that makes Scull Shoals feel almost poetic, in a mean way. The cotton system that fed the town also sabotaged it. A century of open field cotton farming stripped away about 8 to 9 inches of topsoil, and that missing dirt did not vanish politely. It slid into the river, piled up as silt, and literally buried the shoals that gave the place its name. The flow changed, flooding became more frequent, and the head of water needed to power the mills got choked off, so the machinery kept stuttering like it was trying to breathe through a wet towel. Then major floods, including one in 1887, slammed the operation hard enough that the town never really recovered. By around 1900, most people were gone and the mills closed for good. Even the name refuses to settle down. Some say Scull is just a family name, or even a nod to sculls, the oars used on small river skiffs. Others point to old mounds nearby and local stories that once pushed people to spell it Scull Shoals. Either way, the place has a talent for making ordinary words feel loaded. So if you are standing there late afternoon, with the forest getting quiet and the river looking innocent, ask yourself one question. Do you walk deeper into the ruins, or do you turn back while the sun is still on your side? Because Scull Shoals did not collapse because it ran out of cotton. It collapsed because the way people took the cotton broke the river that kept the whole town alive. Number 9, High Falls, Milltown. Remains High Falls feels like the kind of place that should have won. It has the biggest waterfall in Middle Georgia, a dramatic drop of about 135 feet on the Towalega River, the kind of natural power that looks like it was designed to run a town. And for a while it did. Today it sits inside High Falls State Park near Jackson in Monroe County, which is already a little funny if you think about it. The town that once ran on industry is now a place you visit for fresh air and a trail map. In the early 1800s, this was not a picnic spot. This was a working industrial town. You had a store, a grist mill, a cotton gin, a blacksmith shop, a shoe factory, even a hotel. That list matters because it tells you what High Falls used to be. It was not a one-trick settlement clinging to a single job. It was a small machine with multiple gears, the kind of place where people woke up with purpose and went to sleep with sore hands. The river was the engine, the falls were the horsepower, and the town built itself around that constant roar like it was the sound of money. Then the railroad came, and this is where the signature lands. The railroad skipped it. In the 1880s, the main rail line bypassed High Falls, and the town faded fast into a ghost town. Not because the water dried up, not because the falls stopped falling. The town ran out of pass-through, it ran out of strangers, it ran out of that steady flow of bodies and goods and gossip that keeps a place connected to the rest of the world. You can almost picture the moment. A decision on a map, a line drawn slightly to the side, and a whole town quietly realizing it had been left off the future. That kind of decline is mean because it is invisible. There is no dramatic villain, no one thing you can point at and say, that did it. It is just momentum moving elsewhere. Your town still exists, but it becomes irrelevant, which might be the most American tragedy of all. You are not destroyed. You are simply not chosen. Walk through the park now and you can still feel the outline of that old purpose. Near the remnants of industrial foundations, the sound of the water echoes in a way that can mess with your head. You do not need music to make it feel ghostly. The Toaliga keeps pounding the rocks, and your brain starts translating that rhythm into machinery, like the mill is still working somewhere behind the trees, like the town never got the memo that the railroad moved on. And just to prove the place was not done being punished, major flooding in 1994 hit the area hard, damaging parts of High Falls and washing out things like bridges. Even after it became a ghost town, nature still came through and rearranged the remains like it was editing the scene one more time. Number 8. New Manchester. Mill ruins. You want a Milltown story that does not fade out slowly, one sad storefront at a time. This one is the opposite. New Manchester is the mill town that died in one day, and the part that messes with your head is how close it is. About 15 miles from downtown Atlanta, you can go from traffic, billboards, and iced coffee to a red brick skeleton staring at rushing water like it is still waiting for the next shift whistle. That distance is not comforting. It is unsettling. It is close enough to feel like it should not exist. You do not arrive with some epic expedition vibe. You just drift away from the highway a little, and suddenly those walls are there, right beside Sweetwater Creek, standing like a photograph taken right after the world ended and nobody bothered to pick up the pieces. The creek is loud, impatient, always moving. The ruins are silent, stubborn, refusing to explain themselves. Back in 1849, this was a serious operation, a 5-story water-powered textile mill, not a cute little workshop. A big industrial block built to turn the force of the creek into cloth and clothing and whatever else people needed to keep a growing economy dressed and running. Then it grew the way mill towns always do, housing for workers, a store for basics, a whole little ecosystem where life and labor get braided together until you cannot tell where one stops and the other starts. During the Civil War, the mill reportedly produced goods for the Confederacy, which is the kind of detail that turns a building into a target. It was not just a workplace anymore, it was a strategic object. And on July 9, 1864, Union forces burned it. A lot of accounts tied the destruction to Sherman's campaign through Georgia, and whether you follow every military breadcrumb or not, the outcome is brutally simple. One day you have a 5-story mill, then you blink, and you have a brick frame. From a working giant to a hollow shell, fast like someone flipping a switch. Some accounts describe women and children from the mill community being taken away after the area was captured and the mill was burned, and that single phrase, some accounts, is chilling because it hints at a human aftershock. People do not usually picture when they think about ruins. You are standing there for a photo. They were standing there because their entire life just got folded up, without permission. What is left now is the part that feels almost theatrical. The walls are still upright and you can see traces of the old water system, the mill race like scars showing you exactly how the creek used to feed the machinery. It looks like a broken castle dropped into Georgia woods by mistake. And yes, that is the funny part. You do not have to fly to Scotland to get the vibe of standing in the bones of something grand. Atlanta basically has its own ruins section, and it is sitting there like an awkward secret. If you stand in front of it late in the day, you will understand why so many people say the place makes them feel watched. Not because you saw anything, because you heard everything. Sweetwater Creek keeps roaring through the same space where the mill once stole its power, and the sound can trick your brain. It is like walking into a roofless room that still hums with invisible machinery. You start imagining the gears. You start imagining the people. You start wondering what it feels like for a town to vanish, not over decades, but over a single afternoon. And here is the quiet modern footnote that makes it feel even more real. The site has had erosion issues, the kind that can turn history into a hazard, and there have been preservation efforts to stabilize what is left, which means the ruins are not just a spooky backdrop. They are a fragile reminder that even the bones of a place can disappear if nobody holds them up. So let me ask you something, and do not answer too fast. If you are standing there, 15 miles from a city that never stops building, and you are looking at a town that stopped in one day, what does that do to your sense of safety? Do you walk closer to the brick frame, or do you keep a polite distance, like the past might reach out and grab your sleeve? Number 7. Griswoldville, war-erased town. If you came here hoping for towering ruins, do not blame the place when it hands you nothing but air. Griswoldville does not do dramatic rubble. It does silence. Today you are mostly looking at battlefield markers and open ground, the kind of landscape that makes you work for the story. This was once a factory village. Now it is a field and a memory. Like Georgia erased the building and kept the ghost of the economy. The location mattered. Jones County along the Central of Georgia Railway near Macon. In the mid-1800s, that rail line was not just transportation, it was oxygen. And Samuel Griswold understood that. He was one of the South's leading cotton gin makers, and around 1850 he shifted his operation here to hug the tracks and build a company-style village around the factory. He even named it after himself. That is personal branding before TikTok, before merch, before anyone said the word influencer. Just a man planting a flag and saying, "This town is my name." Then the war arrived and the village evolved into something sharper. Starting in 1862, Griswold partnered with A.N. Gunnison to manufacture revolvers modeled after the Colt Navy for the Confederacy. Here is the number you should hear like a heavy door closing: about 3,700 revolvers. The way it is described, no other Confederate maker surpassed that output. 3,700. That is not a hobby. That is a whole identity forged into steel. Griswoldville was not a city yet, but it was already a brand, and the brand was weapons. And that is where the signature twist hits. The town was erased by the very thing it helped produce. During Sherman's march to the sea, Union cavalry burned the factory complex and much of Griswoldville on November 20th, 1864. Think about the speed of that sentence. A working industrial village turns into smoke in a single day. You do not get time to adjust. One morning, you have a future. By night, you have ash. 2 days later, on November 22nd, 1864, the Battle of Griswoldville erupted nearby. Many sources describe it as the only major pitched infantry battle of the entire March to the Sea, which is wild when you remember how famous that campaign is. Out of all that movement, this is where the story stops running and turns around to fight. There is a detail that makes the place feel colder without needing any gore. Accounts note that many in the Georgia militia were young boys and old men, and a Union officer was quoted saying they did not want to keep firing on people like that. That line sticks because it turns war from abstract strategy into something human and uncomfortable. It is not just history, it is a moment when someone realized what they were doing and hated it. After the war, Griswoldville was not rebuilt as an industrial community, and that is the real definition of abandoned here. Not romantic decay, not pretty ruins for your camera. It is a town that vanished from the economic map before it ever got to become a real city. So if you are standing there late afternoon with the wind moving across the field like it is trying to sweep the past under a rug, you have to decide. Do you trust the quiet, or do you hear the missing town loud enough to make you step back? Number 6. Sunbury, abandoned port town. You would never guess this place used to be a port with ambition. You pull into quiet coastal Georgia in Liberty County, on the south bank of the Medway River, and it feels like the world has already turned the volume down on purpose. No skyline, no proud waterfront, no grand main street trying to sell you a story. Sunbury is the port that got erased, and the strangest part is that it was not erased by one villain. It was erased by a whole group project of misery. At its peak, Sunbury was described as a major port, sometimes talked about like a rival to Savannah, a smaller Savannah that actually believed it could grow up and steal the spotlight. Some accounts even put it around 1,000 residents in its best days, and in the regional trade conversation, it gets framed as the second big port after Savannah. That is not. Nothing. That is a town that expected ships, money, gossip, and fresh chances to keep rolling in like the tide. So what happened? War happened first, with the kind of historical gravity that turns thriving places into footnotes. This area gets tied into Revolutionary-era conflict, and Fort Morris nearby is remembered for the line people love to quote, "Come and take it." The problem with brave lines is that they come with consequences. Fighting and upheaval battered the area, and Sunbury took the kind of damage that ports hate most. Not just broken buildings, but broken confidence. Trade does not like uncertainty. Commerce does not move toward smoke. Then nature stepped in, because of course it did. Big storms in the early 1800s show up in the story, the kind that do not just wreck docks, but also wreck the mental math of staying. And then comes disease, yellow fever outbreaks that pushed people to scatter the way a crowd scatters when somebody yells fire. You can rebuild a warehouse. You can rebuild a pier. Rebuilding trust in the air you breathe is a different thing. By the 1840s, the descriptions turn cold. Sunbury is already being treated as a ghost town, and the punchline is cruel. What remains is not the port, not the marketplace, not the proud civic center where people once argued about tariffs and weather. The thing that lasts the longest is a cemetery, and that is what you actually visit now. Sunbury Cemetery, tucked under old oaks with Spanish moss, hanging like the place is wearing mourning on purpose. Some graves are clear, some are lost to time, and the whole scene feels like a book with half the pages torn out. There is often a gate, fencing, interpretive signs, the polite modern world trying to explain what used to be here, like a museum label next to an empty display case. If you stand there in the shade and listen, it is not jump scare spooky. It is slow spooky, the kind that crawls in through your own thoughts. Wind, insects, a distant rustle that sounds like a secret. And you start realizing the signature twist of Sunbury. The town did not just decline, it got wiped to the point where the only loud landmark is where the dead are. Number 5. Auraria, lost gold. Town Auraria is the kind of place that makes you feel bad for rooting for it. Not because it did something wrong, because it got outshined twice, and you can practically hear the universe going, sorry, not you. This is a Georgia gold town that exploded fast, flashed bright, and then got left behind like yesterday's lottery ticket on the sidewalk. It started with the Georgia Gold Rush, that brief, chaotic era when Cherokee country turned into a magnet for desperate hope and quick math. One historical marker puts the 1829 to 1839 haul at about $20 million in gold, which is the kind of number that makes people stop being farmers and start being gamblers. Auraria swelled like a balloon. Early on, it reached roughly 1,000 people, which sounds small, until you imagine it happening fast, with everyone showing up sweaty and convinced they are one pan away from rewriting their life. Even the name is a flex. Auraria comes from aurum, Latin for gold, basically a town called Goldville, with its chest out. For a moment, it looked like the winner. It served as a temporary county seat, which meant it had that special kind of power that comes from paperwork. Courts, records, officials, all the boring stuff that secretly controls where money flows. You can almost picture the town telling itself, we are not just miners, we are becoming official. Then in 1833, that county seat moved to Dahlonega, and the air went out of Auraria's story like somebody popped the balloon with a pin. When the paperwork leaves, the merchants leave. When the merchants leave, the town starts sounding hollow. That was the first time Auraria got outshined. The second time was crueler. Dahlonega did not just take the status, it got the U.S. branch mint in 1838, a federal stamp that basically said, this is the center now. Imagine watching your neighbor get the government seal of approval while you are standing there with muddy boots and a fading sign. Auraria did not lose because the gold vanished overnight. It lost because the spotlight moved 2 miles down the road and refused to look back. And then the third hit arrives, the kind that feels like betrayal from a whole other universe: California. When the California gold rush ignited, it offered a bigger dream, a farther horizon, a louder promise. People who once thought Georgia was the jackpot suddenly decided the real jackpot was west. Auraria watched its remaining ambition pack up and leave, not in one dramatic collapse, but in a quiet drain, like water slipping out of a cracked bucket. Today, the most honest symbol of Auraria might be a roadside historical marker, because the town's greatest monument is its own explanation. If you find old buildings or an old store, the wood and the worn edges do not scream. They whisper. They tell you this was once a boom town, so busy it earned a nickname that sounded like constant collision, like bodies and plans bumping into each other in a gold rush. And then, just as you start feeling sorry for it, Auraria pulls one last trick. A group of people left Georgia's Auraria in 1858 and carried the name to Colorado. That settlement later merged into what became Denver, so the town dies, but the name refuses to. It walks away and starts over somewhere else, like a character in a story who loses everything and still manages to survive in the next chapter. Number 4. Oscarsville, Drown Town. You cannot really drive through Oscarsville. That is the first insult this story delivers. You can type the name into your GPS, follow the calm, confident voice, and it will guide you to a boat ramp like it just solved your problem. And you will stand there staring at Lake Sidney Lanier, realizing the town you came to see is not ahead of you, it is under you. Oscarsville used to be a small rural community in Forsyth County, not a legend, not a monster story, not some cinematic set. Just regular life with the kind of ordinary routines that never expect to become history. That ordinary feeling matters because the signature of Oscarsville is not one ending. It is 2 endings stacked on top of each other, like someone hit delete, then hit delete again, just to be sure. The first erasure comes in 1912 when Forsyth County went through a period that forced more than 1,000 black residents to leave amid intimidation and threats. The Atlanta History Center is careful about one thing, and you should be too. There is a popular myth that the lake was created on purpose to drown a black town, and that simple version is not accurate. The real story is more complicated than the rumor, and in some ways, that is worse, because it means you cannot file it away as a single evil plan and move on. What is clear is that the expulsion happened and its shadow lingered for decades. Oscarsville did not just lose people, it lost its right to be normal. Then comes the second erasure, and it arrives wearing a clean hard hat and a federal schedule. In the 1950s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers created Lake Sidney Lanier as part of the Buford Dam project. Congress authorized it in 1946. The dam was completed in 1956. Paperwork, engineering, progress, the kind of words that sound neutral until you remember what they require. The Corps describes acquiring around 58,000 acres of land and clearing about 14,000 acres of forest to shape the shoreline. And yes, some structures, trees, and traces were left behind, which means when you look at that water, you are not just looking at a lake, you are looking at a lid. This is the part where folklore creeps in, because humans cannot resist turning discomfort into a story you can repeat at a campfire. Lake Lanier has a reputation for being haunted, and Oscarsville gets folded into that reputation as an underwater ghost town. But here is the thing. You do not need anything supernatural to make this feel heavy. The weight is already there. You are standing on the edge of water that covers a community that was already pushed out once before the flooding ever began. Number 3. Taylor's Creek, Vanished Town. You can stand in Georgia and still not be allowed to go to this town. Taylor's Creek is a ghost town behind a gate, the kind of place that does not haunt you with ruins, but with the fact that you cannot even casually wander in. Your map can point, your curiosity can beg, but the land belongs to Fort Stewart now, and Fort Stewart does not care that you are in a storytelling mood. Back in the 18th century, this area was not a restricted zone. By 1768, there was already a small community at Taylor's Creek, near where Taylor's Creek meets Canoochee Creek in Liberty County. People talk about the Taylor's brothers getting land in that creek junction and the community slowly forming the way rural places always do. Not with a big ribbon cutting, but with families, fences, and the quiet confidence that the land will stay yours if you keep working it. By the late 1930s, the region that would become Fort Stewart was scattered with dozens of small communities, and Taylor's Creek was one of them. Think about that for a second. Not a single town, but a patchwork of places, each with its own school memories, church gossip, and family graves. The local picture was simple and stubborn: farming, turpentine, grist mills, the kind of economy that smells like pine sap and soil, and hard days you do not post about online. Then the war era arrives, and the story pivots from slow rural time to fast government time. In the early 1940s, Camp Stewart was created, and communities like Taylor's Creek were bought out and relocated to make room for the military. One local account pins the buyout to 1941, which is such a clean number for such a messy human experience. The New Georgia Encyclopedia notes that Taylor's Creek was one of the early villages, along with places like Clyde and Willie that were left behind, and it estimates that more than 1,500 families were displaced by the creation of the military reservation. That is not just a town moving, that is a whole world being folded up. Here is the signature sting. Taylor's Creek was erased by purchase. No dramatic fire, no hurricane headline, just paperwork and compensation and the quiet pressure of a national priority. Your home becomes a line item. Your front porch becomes a coordinate. And then one day, it is not yours. And you are not even supposed to visit like you are stopping by a friend's place. But not everything vanished. The cemetery remains, cared for, tucked under trees like a pause button on time. That is the part that always hits hardest in these stories. A whole town disappears, and the graves stay. It is like the land is saying, I will let you remember, but only in this one fenced corner. Some descendants have worked over the years to get permission to enter and pay respects, and that detail is both sweet and unsettling. Memory trying to return to a place that is literally locked. Number 2. Dungeness. Island ruins. You step onto Cumberland Island, and the first thing you notice is how the island refuses to behave like a museum. The air is salty, the trails feel a little too quiet, and the wildlife acts like you are the visitor who forgot to knock. Somewhere out there, wild horses wander around like bored security guards, and they do not care if you are rich, famous, or historically important. They look at you the same way they would look at a trash can, with mild curiosity and zero respect. Then you head toward the south end into Cumberland Island National Seashore, and you reach Dungeness, the spot that people treat like the island's main stage. It is beautiful in that unsettling way where the scenery is calm, but the story is not, because you are standing in front of what was once one of the richest houses on the island, and it could not survive one night. Dungeness was built in 1884 as a winter home for Thomas Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie's brother and business partner, along with Lucy Carnegie and their 9 children. Even saying that out loud feels like a flex. Winter home on a barrier island, as if the ocean was just a decorative feature. Thomas died young, but Lucy did not let the place shrink back into modesty. She kept expanding and improving it for about 30 years, pouring money into it like she was trying to outbuild time itself. Sources commonly describe it as a 59-room mansion in the Queen Anne style, which sounds absurdly oversized for an island that still feels half wild. It is the kind of house that makes you think, who exactly did they imagine they were impressing? The seagulls. And then you look at what is left. Brick walls, stone, open sky where ceilings used to be. The mansion burned in 1959, and the fire did not just remove the roof. It removed the illusion that wealth is a kind of armor. When you walk through the ruins, it feels like you are inside a giant empty mouth, all teeth and no voice. The windows frame nothing but air, and the wind moves through the rooms like it still pays rent. People sometimes call these haunted ruins, not because you are going to get a jump scare, but because your brain keeps trying to rebuild the missing parts. You can almost hear laughter that is not there. You can almost imagine chandeliers that are gone. And every time the sun drops lower, the walls look like they are burning again, not with flames, but with that soft orange light that makes everything feel like a memory being reheated. Right nearby, the island delivers the funniest insult to the mansion's ego. The tabby house, built around 1800, still stands. It was made of tabby, a tough mix that used oyster shells, lime, sand, and water, tied to the Nathaniel Green family after the Revolutionary era. So you are standing in front of the richest ruin, and the thing that survived the longest is basically an oyster shell house from more than 2 centuries ago. If that does not make you question the whole idea of built to last, nothing will. Number 1. Ebenezer, Forgotten Settlement. They named it Ebenezer, which basically means a stone of help, a spiritual anchor, a promise that says, we're going to be okay out here. And the first lesson this town learned was painfully practical. If you're trying to build a utopia, you better pick the right location, because they founded Ebenezer in 1734, and just 2 years later they had to move the whole town. About 150 Salzburgers, German-speaking Protestant settlers, established Ebenezer with the approval of James Oglethorpe. It was not just a place to live, it was a project, a frontier experiment in building a model religious community, shaped by their pastor Johann Martin Boltzius, who pushed the idea that faith could be organized into daily life so tightly it would protect people from chaos. That is the dream. And then the land reminds you that dreams still need water, transportation, and basic survival math. In 1736, they relocated closer to the Savannah River because idealism is easier when your supplies can actually arrive. What makes Ebenezer different from the other places on this list is what refused to disappear. The town faded, the buildings and the bustle went quiet, but the church stayed standing like it had a personal grudge against time. Jerusalem Lutheran Church was built in the late 1760s using local brick, and the walls are described as about 21 inches thick. That is not a detail you gloss over. That is a fortress pretending to be a sanctuary. When you stand near it, your brain immediately understands the scale. Thick walls, heavy history, the kind of structure that makes you feel small in a way that is almost respectful. Ebenezer took hard hits during the Revolutionary War era, and later in 1782 it even served briefly as Georgia's temporary capital. That is the weird twist people do not expect. A place can be damaged by war and still be important enough to hold government for a moment. But that moment passes. Centers of power move. Administrative gravity shifts. And when the courthouse conversations and the service economy move on, the town loses its pulse. Ebenezer declines in the most American way possible. War bruises it. The capital leaves. People follow the work. The work follows the roads. And the town becomes a name that sounds bigger than what is left. But Jerusalem does not go away. The cemetery stays too, quiet enough that you start hearing things you normally ignore. Wind, birds, the soft scrape of Spanish moss moving like it is breathing, and you are not being jump scared. You are being watched by history in the calmest way. The town vanished, but the place of worship stands there like a witness, like it is saying, I remember every footstep you forgot. Here's the thing about abandoned places in Georgia. They do not just die. They get edited out. A railroad bends away, a storm rewrites a shoreline, a factory goes silent. A name migrates west and lives a second life somewhere else. And when you stand in these spaces, you realize the creepiest part is not what's left behind. It's how fast a whole community can become a footnote you almost missed. So before you scroll, ask yourself, if your town started fading tomorrow, what would you fight to keep? And what would you let go? And would you notice the moment the future quietly took the exit without you? If you want a part 2 for another state, tell me which one and why.